Imagine this. You've had a long day, but instead of traffic jams, emails, and Wi-Fi that keeps buffering right as the video gets good, your long day was spent chasing mammoths, sharpening rocks, and trying not to get eaten by a saber-toothed cat. It's 80,000 years ago. There's no Netflix, no coffee shops, no vending machines. Just you, your clan, and whatever weird-looking roots your cousin insists are edible. And then somewhere between survival and sheer boredom, someone eats a mushroom, or chews a strange leaf, or throws seeds on a fire, inhales the smoke, and suddenly thinks the stars are talking back. Welcome to the original party. This wasn't recreational in the modern sense. No dance floors, no disco balls, just a bunch of half-naked humans around a fire going, "Bro, do you see that mammoth smiling at me?" The truth is, our Stone Age ancestors almost certainly experimented with ways to alter their minds, not because they had bouncers and rave wristbands, but because curiosity is wired into us. And curiosity mixed with berries, barks, and bugs sometimes made things really interesting. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through what getting high was like in the Stone Age. Don't worry, no awkward hangovers here. Just a slow, cozy drift through ancient campfires, fermented fruits, mysterious shamans, and the first ever bad trip. So pull up your blanket, settle into your pillow, because the past is about to get weird and a little bit funny. You're lying there, somewhere soft, somewhere warm, and the mind is ready to drift. So let's slip quietly, like smoke curling from an ancient hearth, into a night 80,000 years ago, where the air is cold, but the fire is kind, and a scatter of humans are all pretending they're not keeping an eye on the berry pile. It has been a good day. Nobody got trampled. The spears mostly came back, with their owners attached. The children made a game out of softly throwing sticks at shadows, which, to their credit, the shadows won. Someone returns with a woven sling of fruit that smells a little suspicious. Not bad suspicious, more like, did this mango get promoted without telling anyone? Suspicious. The skin is mottled with gold, softened by sun, and when a curious thumb presses into the flesh, the juice runs with a little foam. The fruit gives off a perfume that's equal parts sweet and scoundrel. It has been transformed, without priests or brewers, by unseen yeasts riding the breeze, taking sugar and rearranging it into something warmer, louder, and just a touch sideways. One person tastes. He's the kind who will taste almost anything, because every group has that person, and evolution, for reasons known only to itself, and possibly to slapstick comedy, insists on producing them. The first sip is a small heresy against caution, and then there's a pause. His eyes widen, not with terror, but with that pleasant surprise you get when a song you forgot you loved starts playing from an invisible speaker in the sky. Another taste, this time offered to a friend who, out of politeness and a severe case of FOMO that hasn't yet been invented, agrees. The effect is slow and warm. The edges of the world soften, as if someone took sandpaper to anxiety. Firelight looks less like a hazard and more like a very supportive friend. The smell of the night crushed grass, damp earth, the animal musk that says, "We live," seems to lean closer and introduce itself. A giggle starts somewhere inappropriate and refuses to apologize. The clan is not partying. There is no word for that. There is only a new sensation arriving on bare feet, laying a hand across the shoulders and suggesting that Maybe the stars have been rehearsing for weeks, just to perform tonight. Fermentation is chemistry that pretends to be magic. Overripe fruit, cracked skins, the mingling of wild yeasts drifting on dust motes that have been around longer than anyone living can remember. These elements conspire to produce a liquid that takes the day's harshness and dips it in honey. Fruit sugars become ethanol and carbon dioxide in some ancient, obedient equation, and the mouth tastes the miracle as tiny bubbles tattle on the process. Even if nobody can name it, someone knows it's not an accident. The old woman there is always an old woman, knotted with experience and full of editorial notes, sniffs, raises an eyebrow that says, "Mind your dose," and smiles, because she, too, remembers a night when the moon seemed closer. There are stories about elephants getting tipsy on fallen marula fruit, and monkeys splayed like poets beneath fig trees in the warm collapse of fermentation. Some of these stories are more enthusiastic than precise. It turns out you need a lot of fermented fruit to tilt an elephant, and elephants are the original designated walkers. But the observation is not wrong. Animals notice sugar, notice scent, notice opportunity. Our ancestors were animals too, with hunger as a tutor and curiosity as a hobby, so dangerous it should have come with a helmet. When the fruit season peaked and the ground under certain trees turned into a fragrant carpet of softened pulp, you can imagine the evening chorus, insects singing at a higher pitch than usual, birds gossiping beyond their perimeter, a few humans seated carefully, passing something sticky that made the fire's conversation more fluid and the silence more musical. No one is inventing wine here. There are no clay jars, no clever airlocks, no notes of blackberry with a finish of smugness. There's just an accident that happens so often, it becomes tradition. The trick is learning to meet the accident halfway. Someone figures out that you can pile the ripest fruit in a shallow pit, lined with leaves, and keep it away from too much rain. Someone else realizes that a few days' patience produces a drink that is both dangerous and delightful, like befriending a river. They do not have a word for microbes, but they have a working relationship with them, because microbes whisper to bread and bark, to wounds and gourds, and humans survive by listening to whispers they can't name. The first accidental high wasn't always gentle. For every night of soft laughter and brave philosophy, there were days when the fruit had turned sharp and sly, when acetaldehyde was busy writing hangovers into the morning, before the night had even met its slippers. Someone overdid it, there is always an overdoer, and they serve an important educational function. The next dawn arrives with a headache like thunder, trying to get into the house. Eyes squint. A vow is made. Never again. The vow is kept. For, at least a week. Then, another harvest arrives, and the world offers another, small, foamy rehearsal for forgetting. But tucked into the warmth is something more than diversion. The first accidental high was also the first accidental ritual. The fire becomes a stage. Faces glow from within, as if lit by their own lanterns. The hunters recount a chase with gestures so elaborate they become choreography. A mother sings a lullaby that tightens the knot between her and a child, and the melody feels rounder, more edible. Someone, perhaps the clan's clever maker, stares at a flint core and sees the blade trapped inside it like a fish in ice. And the next morning, he naps it free with a confidence he did not possess before. The altered mind isn't an escape from the day, it's an oblique angle into it, a way to see around the corners of a problem. Novelty loosens knots. For a species that will someday turn knots into ship's rigging and shawls and metaphors, That loosening is powerful. You can almost hear the conversation that wasn't quite language yet. A complicated exchange of sounds and hands. That tree, someone says, with a finger and a grunt that means over there. Those fruits, says another, patting a stomach and pretending to sway, which now means ripe enough. A third person mimics the fire's flicker with a hand and then scratches 2 lines in the dust, which, for tonight only, obviously represent we gather here after the sun goes to lie down. Laughter follows because the drawing looks like a bird that gave up. Laughter follows because laughter is a good enough reason to keep living, especially on days when food is thin. I like to think there was, by the second or third time, a designated someone responsible. She stands by the pit, feet planted, a gentle sheriff. She allocates gourdfuls with all the solemnity a person in a mammoth skin wrap can manage, and taps the rim when someone returns too often, her expression saying, "We need you upright tomorrow to remember where the river night." Herons fish. Silliness blooms, but stays within a fence. Danger exists. The scent of a big cat might thread the wind. The cliff edge is still a cliff edge, even when the stars are applauding you personally. The children must be kept away from both the pit and the fire's bright persuasion. The clan learns the same way we still do, with practice, with mistakes that become proverbs, with tenderness dressed as rules. Later in the season, the fruit is gone, and a different accident arrives. Honey left too long in a warm pouch, or honey diluted with water and forgotten in a stopper-sealed gourd, wakes up fizzy and mischievous. Mead before mead was mead. A few sips and people swear they can hear the bees discussing them, which is valid criticism because the bees probably are. Honey holds a map of a whole landscape in sugars and scents, and when that map ferments, the drink becomes a lecture by the valley itself. There are tales, still told in the mountains far from here, of mad honey, honey whose flowers arm it with neurotic little surprises, and one can imagine a night when the clan learned that not all gold is kind. The price of knowledge is nausea sometimes, and a memory that stays on the tongue for years, and yet the evening returns to sweetness. Flames turn logs into a long red cave where stories live. Embers breathe like sleeping animals. Above, the sky's sheer black fabric is punctured by cold fires that have been dead longer than mammoths will exist, and yet they shine like gossip. The accidental high becomes a lubricant, not for chaos, but for communion. Arms relax. Fear loosens its belt. Old griefs. Remember the brother who didn't come back from the ravine are held briefly. Softly, the clan hums around them, a surround, sound embrace, and grief looks up and says, "Thank you," and takes the night off. Somewhere, someone asks a question, without knowing it is a question. Why do we dream? And why do some dreams try to follow us back when we wake? It is possible that the fruit, the honey, the experiment offers the first proto-answer. To practice being brave, to practice being together, to practice being human without the test scoring us. The first accidental high passes like a small weather system. It lifts the day, rains a little memory, leaves behind the mineral smell of we learned something. It teaches that the world can change inside you without the world changing around you. It teaches that breath can carry a song that wasn't there before. It teaches restraint, sometimes dramatically. Mostly, it teaches that the line between survival and celebration was always thinner than we thought, even when it was drawn with a burnt stick on a cave wall. And as the night leans into sleep, As the last giggle decides it is now a yawn in disguise, someone carefully covers the pit with leaves. Tomorrow they will check it and nod wisely at their own luck, which is now called skill. They will remember which tree makes the good accidents. They will add that tree to the map inside their heads, the one that already holds water, shade, flint, danger, and the place where the wind plays nicely with the smoke. The accidental high, which started as a trespass, becomes a neighbor. The clan will visit again, and the stars, the impolite stars, will still be up there, refusing to go to bed, telling everyone they look beautiful when they laugh. Out of that warmth we tiptoe into the next truth, which is that none of this happens if humans are not the nosiest creatures ever to leave footprints. Curiosity is our most dangerous hobby and the world's favorite sitcom. Imagine the same camp, the same fire, but now it's morning, and the air has that crisp, after-rain clarity that makes color brighter, like the world turned up its saturation just to show off. Breakfast is ongoing. It is, as always, a flexible concept that covers anything from berries and roots to the leftovers of a hare who zigged when a zagger would have been wiser. A child wanders over with a handful of leaves and asks in looks and squeaks, "These?" The old woman shakes her head so emphatically the child learns what no means in every language at once. But the older boy, the one with the experimental haircut that is less a style and more an incident, watches the leaves as if they were telling secrets. Why do we keep tasting random stuff? Because the world doesn't come with labels, and the only barcodes are the stripes on a hyena, which are not helpful. Curiosity's engine hums on dopamine, the brain's little yes and molecule, which rewards novelty like a drama teacher applauding a weird but promising monologue. In small doses, novelty is survival. New trail, new food source, new way to tie a stone to a stick so it stays in place, even when you're showing off in front of people you want to impress. In large doses, novelty is a cliff. The trick is learning where the cliff is, and humanity's method for that is to get closer than we meant to, many times, and then tell a story about it so nobody else walks right over. In the Stone Age, curiosity gets formalized the way rain becomes rivers. Incident flows into habit. Habit carves a groove in memory. Memory turns into a path you can follow in the dark. Groups evolve job descriptions without writing them down. There is the tracker, who knows by morning which patch of earth a herd disturbed at midnight. There is the maker, whose hands look like a piano player's, except pianos haven't been invented, and he keeps staring at rocks as if they're trying to break up with him. There is the fire whisperer, who knows which wood sings sweetly and which explodes into fireworks when nobody asked for a celebration. And there is the taster of maybe, a role filled by someone with good instincts, a sturdy liver, and a clan that would miss them if things go sideways but knows. The whole clan might starve without someone brave enough to sample the weird tuber that smells like a dare. This is where curiosity stops being purely, ooh, shiny, and becomes a science that lives in bodies. Tongues carry bitterness detectors. Tiny warning bells evolved across eons, because bitterness often means don't. Some people have louder bells. Others, cursed or blessed by genetics, have bells that ring with less enthusiasm, and those are the ones who say, "It's probably fine," and are sometimes right. Livers host molecules, enzymes, with complicated names and complicated social lives that transform plant chemicals into less dangerous versions, like bodyguards escorting unruly guests out of the nightclub. Families pass down more than cheekbones. They pass down enzyme quirks, which means certain lineages can nibble leaves that would make other families write emergency songs. Curiosity becomes culture the moment it learns to share. Watch the group in the afternoon as they forage. There is choreography here. The grandmother shows the toddler how to test a berry with the gentlest lick of the lips, then wait the length of 2 breaths, scanning the body like a lighthouse. The adolescent, impatient and ostentatiously immortal, reaches for something spiky, and the uncle clears his throat in the exact tone that means, "Remember when your cousin tried that and spent an evening loudly regretting it behind the bush?" Knowledge is a web spread across years. The strands are jokes, warnings, recipes, taboos, and lullabies, disguised as lists of which flowers are friends. A small green plant, unremarkable as a whisper, hides a bite that makes the mouth buzz and the tongue flirt with electricity. Another plant's roots have a starch that turns to sweet on the fire and fills a belly like gratitude fills a chest. There is a bark that numbs pain just enough to let a sprained ankle keep up. There is a seed that does something odd to the pulse when you throw it on the flames. The smoke wraps around the breath and changes the color of the mind by half a shade. None of these plants arrive with warning labels. All of them arrive with teachers. Curiosity puts them in the syllabus, but the clan chooses the curriculum. Humor evolves right alongside caution. When the taster of maybe miscalculates, when the leaf turns his face the color of moss, and his heart becomes a drummer at a festival, you can bet that 3 winters later, someone will still be imitating the exact expression he made, to howls of laughter and a moral at the end. The moral is small amounts, with friends, near the fire, in the sight of someone who knows what to do. A whole medical system grows out of the need to try things safely. The healer, her hands scarred by kindness and caution, watches pupils, counts breaths, presses ear to chest. She develops protocols without paperwork. Sip water, breathe slow, hum low to vibrate, panic loose from ribs, walk in circles until the ground agrees to stop tilting at opinions. The first harm reduction clinic is a ring of stones and a grandmother who refuses to let anyone be alone in their strangeness. Curiosity also invents gadgets. The clan learns to cook curiosity into caution, roots that will argue with your digestive tract when raw become gentle if sliced thin and kissed by coals. Leaves that scold your mouth mellow when dried and crumbled into stews. Seeds become less quarrelsome when roasted. Resins burn into fragrant plumes that carry the spirit of a plant into the nose like a courier with a polite bow. The first inhalation is an accident. Of course, it island. Someone throws a handful of unknown leaves onto the embers, and suddenly the air has opinions. People cough, they cough again, and somewhere in that coughing is the realization that breath is a doorway, and smoke knows where the hinges are. This doesn't mean every night turns into a vision quest. Most nights are the gentle tyranny of chores, scraping hides, mending nets, telling stories that make the day sit down and behave. But curiosity has a calendar of its own, a lunar rhythm. Every few weeks, someone remembers the seeds that made the evening feel like a wide river you could float down without moving. Ritual grows around this remembering, because ritual is how humans make sure good things happen on purpose. The group gathers at the same time, in the same place, not because anyone ordered it, but because they feel the tug of the pattern and choose to be tugged together. Offerings are made to the practical gods. A few of the best nuts placed at the base of the best tree. A quiet thank you to the creek that stayed even when the sky didn't. Then a small, careful dose is shared, and the clan practices the art of being in the same dream without wandering off. Children watch and learn without partaking. Curiosity, at their age, is for ants under logs, and the astonishing fact that beetles have opinions about everything. They are kept back from the inhalation smoke by a semicircle of hips and knees, an architecture of care. They fall asleep to voices softened by herbs and low singing, and perhaps they dream of a world that will include pottery and pigments that don't wash away, and words that fit together like sandals on a long road. Not all curiosity runs through plants. Some of it runs through movement. Someone dances in the smoke and discovers that dizziness is a door, too. The body learns to spin and then stop, to see the world catch up like a friend late to the meeting, and that catching up feels like laughter. Someone else stares at flicker for a time that is longer than most times, and then he begins to see shapes in the coals that he will later carve into bone or shell, because curiosity doesn't respect borders between senses. A taste becomes a sound, becomes a shape, becomes a tool, becomes a custom, becomes a story, becomes a law. When people say Stone Age, they mean the era of stone tools, but we could just as easily have called it the Story Age. Curiosity writes the first drafts. Ritual does the editing. There are stakes. Poison exists. The plant that looks like a friend's cousin might be a stranger with lawsuits. A careful failure rate haunts all innovation. You can sense the clan's math here even without numbers. Try new, but only a little. Try new, but not everyone at once. Try new earlier in the day when there's time to recover before night. Because night has its own curriculum, and you cannot do makeup classes while a leopard is taking attendance. These practices become norms, and the norms become norms elsewhere, because groups meet other groups at the edges of territories, like opposite shores of the same lake. They trade shells and songs, spouses and strategies, fruits that blush into fizz, and seeds that hum into smoke. Knowledge networks emerge long before roads, and the bandwidth is laughter, gossip, gratitude. Curiosity has a face. Tonight, it belongs to a girl with a stripe of ash across her nose because she tried to poke the fire into a heart shape. She watches the old woman crumble a little of the good seed into the embers, watches the smoke rise, watches the first thin melody of altered air weave into the ordinary air. Her eyes ask a question that will take years to answer. She will become, if the world is kind, a keeper of compounds, a librarian whose shelves are leaves and stones, and whose subject headings are pain, rest, bravery, and please not that again. She will tell jokes about the time the taster of maybe turned briefly green. She will place a hand on an anxious chest and hum a note that says, "Anchor here." She will grow old, and her granddaughter will sit at her feet, and the granddaughter will invent a better way to tell the difference between two plants that pretend to be the same and are not. This is how curiosity doesn't kill us. It teaches us to build guardrails out of songs. If you listen closely to the breath of the sleepers around our ancient fire, you can hear the ledger of curiosity balancing itself. Some breaths are deep with earned rest. Some are shallow with the last wisps of worry. Some sputter into a brief snore that makes everyone else smile in their sleep and adjust positions as if the dream had asked them politely to move over. The fire settles. The seeds have said their piece. The night drapes its cool hand over foreheads and closes eyes the way a mother closes a door softly, with love and with the promise that she will listen in the hallway. Tomorrow, the clan will rise into a world that is both the same and slightly more known. The path to the water will be worn a hint deeper by feet and gratitude. A new mark on a tree will remind everyone which bark is brave and which bark is a bully. Curiosity will wander off a safe distance and wait for them like a dog, tongue out, tail moving, incapable of malice, capable of chaos, full of love, possessed of terrible ideas that, properly supervised, become inventions. And the fruit tree, our fermenting friend, will not be in season, and that's fine. We don't need the sky to talk every night. Sometimes it's enough that the ground listens. The story begins in firelight, because fire is where almost everything begins for our species. Fire is warmth. Fire is safety. Fire is roasted. Mammoth steaks, if you're lucky, and roasted beetles, if you're not. But fire is also curiosity, embodied in crackling orange, and it begs for experimentation. People learned early that tossing things into the flames made the world smell different. Dry pine resin made sparks jump like mischievous stars. Green leaves hissed and spat, releasing sharp perfumes into the night air. At first, this was entertainment. Humans love entertainment, even when entertainment is just watching smoke swirl and thinking, that looks like Uncle's profile, and Uncle owes me a spear. Yet slowly, accidents became observations. When certain herbs landed in the fire, people's eyes watered, but they also felt lighter, not in the way of hunger, but in the way of mood. A heaviness lifted, shoulders untensed, laughter came easier. Someone, of course, leaned in to sniff more deeply, and someone else scolded them, only to then lean in themselves, moments later. That's how experiments usually go. Scold first, participate second. It is almost inevitable that at some point a clan gathered around a fire tossed in stalks of sage or cannabis, or some local plant now lost to history, and realized that smoke was more than a nuisance. The flames were the laboratory, the smoke, the invisible teacher. We may never know which plant was first, but the lesson was repeated across continents. Fire made things edible that were poisonous raw, and smoke carried the plant's essence straight into the lungs. It was an invention hidden in plain sight. Inhaling is both obvious and counterintuitive. The nose has always sampled scents on the breeze, deciding whether something was food or foe. But the idea that breathing smoke could change your mind was something different altogether, like realizing thunder has rhythm, or that a stick could become a spear if you got violent with a rock long enough. Some herbs calmed, some excited, some made the heart race, like it had just remembered a debt it couldn't pay. The people who noticed these effects became the first accidental pharmacologists. They probably didn't use words like medicinal properties, but rather, this one makes me dance, or this one makes me talk to ancestors until I fall over. Around the fire, rituals began. Perhaps a pinch of herbs would be thrown in before a hunt. The smoke considered a way to summon courage or favor. Perhaps a healer would burn leaves beside someone sick, letting the fragrance comfort them or disguise less pleasant smells. We can imagine the smoke curling up into the dark, and the clan watching it with reverence, whispering that the spirit of the plant was riding those wisps skyward, carrying prayers or secrets to the unseen. But if you've ever been to a bonfire, you know humans cannot resist leaning into smoke, even when they're supposed to lean away. It's practically a genetic trait. So one night, someone crouched near the fire, maybe to add more wood, and drew in a lungful of smoke infused with whatever plants had been tossed in. There would have been coughing, always coughing, and then, perhaps, an unmistakable shift. Maybe colors brightened, maybe sounds stretched into strange echoes, maybe the storyteller's voice suddenly felt like it was arriving from inside your own head. That accidental inhalation became a repeatable trick. Not everyone enjoyed it. Some hated the sting in the throat, the heaviness in the chest, but enough people found it fascinating, soothing, or revelatory that it spread. From simple experiments of burning herbs for smell came the controlled practice of inhaling for altered states. Imagine the clan forming a circle. The healer tosses a bundle of leaves on the fire, and smoke curls upward. Instead of avoiding it, the group leans toward it, deliberately breathing it in. The ritual is now codified. Breathe together, cough together, and then drift together into that half-dream space where laughter comes easier and shadows stretch longer. In these moments, the ordinary boundaries between people blur. A clan, usually divided by roles, hunters, gatherers, children, elders, becomes a single body, inhaling the same breath, sharing the same altered perception. This is how social glue is made, not from elmers, but from inhaled plant smoke and collective vulnerability. Not all experiments went smoothly. Some nights the fire burned too hot, the herbs too strong, and half the group spent hours convinced their feet were melting. Other times the effect was disappointing. Nothing more than sore lungs and a promise never to do that again, broken promptly at the next full moon. Trial and error became tradition. People remembered which plants were gentle and which ones required supervision from an elder with the patience of a saint. These elders, over time, became shamans. The ones who understood that fire plus plant plus smoke equaled not just altered states, but communion. Communion with each other, with the environment, with the unseen. Even now, you can still feel echoes of those discoveries. Sage burned in ceremonies, resins in temples, incense in meditation halls. They all descend from that primal experiment, that moment when someone realized smoke wasn't just a byproduct of fire, but a bridge. The inhalation experiment is, in many ways, the first human-made doorway to altered consciousness. It started by accident, as so many things do, but became a deliberate practice that shaped culture, spirituality, and even medicine. And so the story of smoke folds gently into another, because plants weren't only burned, sometimes they were eaten, chewed, or nibbled on during long walks, when hunger overruled caution. And sometimes, those bites introduced humans to mysteries stranger and deeper than smoke could offer. Mushrooms are tricky things. Some are delicious. Others will end your day quickly and permanently. And a few exist in a strange liminal zone where reality itself starts to ripple. Imagine wandering in the damp cool of a forest, hunger growling in your belly. You see small caps pushing through soil, bright against the dark loam. They look harmless, innocent even, like umbrellas for ants. Someone, at some time, took a bite. It might have been curiosity. It might have been desperation. It might have been that eternal Stone Age logic of, if animals can eat it, maybe we can too. And soon, the world shifted. Trees breathed. Rocks pulsed. The line between waking and dreaming dissolved. Welcome to the mushroom mysteries. The first trip would have been confusing, terrifying, hilarious, and unforgettable all at once. Imagine trying to explain to your clan that the ground is breathing and the stars are humming. They might have laughed, or listened with awe, or backed away slowly, depending on the details. But the experience would be retold, because humans cannot resist telling stories, especially when they've just witnessed the moon wink at them. And those stories would grow into myths, and the myths into rituals. Mushrooms that altered perception became not just food but portals, tools for shamans, ways of speaking to spirits, ancestors, or gods, before gods had names. Some mushrooms brought visions, colorful explosions in the mind's eye. Others brought deep introspection, the kind of thoughts that would later become philosophy if you survived them. A few caused wild euphoria, dances that lasted until exhaustion, or the sort of laughter that echoes into the night and confuses the owls. But of course, some mushrooms simply poisoned, making muscles seize and stomachs rebel. Distinguishing between the helpful and the harmful required sharp observation and oral tradition. Elders taught children, this cap is safe. This one will make you see the dead. This one will make you join them. That knowledge was survival, disguised as folklore. And yet, despite the risks, mushrooms persisted in human history. They offered more than nutrition. They offered experience, altered states that felt like stepping beyond the ordinary world. For early humans, who already lived in a universe alive with mystery, that was no small thing. To eat a mushroom and watch the forest dance was to feel part of a larger pattern. It gave meaning, or at least gave the appearance of meaning, and sometimes that's enough to keep a species curious. It is not hard to imagine the role mushrooms played in shaping belief systems. A shaman eats them before a ritual, collapses into visions, and emerges hours later with a new song, a new rule, a new explanation for why the sun rises. The clan listens. They see the conviction in the shaman's eyes, and they trust that the otherworldly journey brought back wisdom, whether it was divine truth or just the after effects of psilocybin, didn't matter. What mattered was that the experience changed people, and changed people changed their communities. So the mushroom mysteries echo forward, stitched into myths, religions, and folklore across the world. The Mayans, the Siberians, the Greeks, all much later, but likely tapping into the same root that started when one ancestor, hungry or reckless or brave, nibbled on a cap in the shadow of a tree. To trip was to see differently, and to see differently was sometimes to survive, sometimes to create, sometimes to tell a story so strange it shaped the culture. And as you rest, you can picture it, a circle of people under the canopy of ancient trees, a fire smouldering nearby, smoke drifting upward, and in their hands, small mushrooms gathered from damp earth. They eat, they wait, and soon the forest becomes a cathedral, the stars, an audience, their own laughter, a hymn. They were our ancestors, and through fire, smoke, and fungi, they were already exploring not just the land around them, but the vast and uncharted landscapes of the human mind. There are few foods in human history that get the same reverence as honey. Golden, sticky, sweet. It's basically sunlight turned into syrup by winged alchemists. People 80,000 years ago didn't have candy shops or bakeries, so when someone found a hive and braved the angry cloud of buzzing security guards, it was cause for celebration. Honey was pure luxury, an explosion of sugar in a world where sugar barely existed. But here's the thing, not all honey is created equal. Sometimes it carries a secret stinger of its own. Enter mad honey, one of the strangest gifts nature ever gave us, a gift that bites back. Imagine an early hunter-gatherer returning with sticky fingers, proud of having risked life and limb to climb a tree and raid a hive. He comes back to camp triumphant, his hair full of twigs and a few bees still angrily orbiting his head like tiny planets of rage. Everyone gathers, their mouths already watering. The children clap. The elders lean in. Honey is rare, precious, and so sweet that even a few mouthfuls can feel like a holiday. But this time, there's something different. The honey looks normal, golden, and glistening in the firelight. But the flavor has an extra twist, a bitter edge. Not bad enough to spit out, but strange enough that the old woman raises an eyebrow. And then, half an hour later, people start acting unusual. First come the giggles. Normal enough sugar rush. Maybe. Then comes the swaying. The complaints of dizziness. Someone insisting the stars are spinning faster than usual. One poor soul collapses dramatically, only to announce from the ground that he feels like he's floating above the earth. The clan stares in both amusement and horror. What was supposed to be a dessert has turned into an accidental hallucinogen. Welcome to the world of rhododendron honey, otherwise known as mad honey. You see, in certain parts of the world, especially the mountains, where rhododendrons bloom in stubborn defiance, bees feed on flowers that contain grayanotoxins. These are not your friendly, everyday plant chemicals. These are compounds that mess with the nervous system, making hearts beat funny and brains see things that aren't there. When bees collect nectar from these flowers, the toxins slip into the honey, creating a concoction that tastes sweet but acts like a prankster. A spoonful can give you a dizzy head rush. 2 spoonfuls might knock you flat, and 3 spoonfuls might convince you that mammoths are whispering investment advice. For early humans, stumbling across mad honey must have been both terrifying and hilarious. Terrifying, because you never knew if this batch of golden sweetness would floor you. Hilarious, because once someone recovered, the story was just too good not to repeat. Remember when Koro ate half a hive and thought his feet were on fire? Good times. Word of mouth became survival protocol. Take honey carefully, test a little first, and don't trust rhododendrons no matter how pretty they look. Of course, humans being humans, some decided this strange honey wasn't just a mistake, it was an opportunity. Even today, in the Black Sea region of Turkey and in parts of Nepal, mad honey is harvested deliberately. Hunters climb sheer cliffs to collect it, risking falls and stings, because a few drops are believed to have medicinal and even spiritual properties. Too much will give you the sweats and a quick trip to unconsciousness, but in small amounts, it can create euphoria or a kind of dreamy detachment. Our ancestors may not have had words for psychoactive compounds, but they understood that this honey had power. It wasn't just food, it was a doorway. You can almost picture the rituals that might have sprung up around it. Honey used in ceremonies, shared sparingly under the supervision of an elder who knew the difference between a nice buzz and let's start digging a grave. Honey wasn't just a treat, it was a test. To eat it was to flirt with danger, to trust that the sweetness of the bees could carry you without knocking you sideways. That tension between delight and risk is probably why stories about dangerous honey still survive thousands of years later. And yet, there's something undeniably human about turning even dangerous honey into tradition. We've always been willing to risk discomfort for the chance at altered states, even when those states are delivered by sticky golden goo. Somewhere in the dim firelight of prehistory, people laughed through their dizziness, clutched their spinning heads, and decided that maybe, just maybe, the bees were onto something more than dessert. Which brings us to another figure, one who looked at fire, smoke, plants, and yes, honey, and decided these things weren't just accidents. They were tools. They were messages from another realm. They were invitations to step outside ordinary life. These figures were the shamans the first guides of the mind's wilderness. Picture a small gathering at dusk. The clan sits in a circle, tired from the day's hunt, their bellies grumbling. Into this quiet steps someone who is equal parts respected and feared. The one who knows the plants, the smoke, the honey, the mushrooms. This person has scars, knowledge etched into their body, by experiments survived, and eyes that sometimes look like they're watching a world nobody else can see. When a child is sick, they call this person. When the hunt feels cursed, they ask this person to fix it. When someone accidentally eats the wrong berry and starts insisting the ground is made of snakes, this is the one who stays calm and mutters prayers while everyone else panics. The shaman's role was both practical and mysterious. On the practical side, they were early scientists. They catalogued plants, not with notebooks, but with memory and story. They knew which root dulled pain, which smoke calmed anxiety, which honey might make you see ancestors you weren't expecting. On the mysterious side, they explained the unexplainable. Thunder wasn't just weather, it was a spirit speaking. A trance wasn't just a side effect, it was a journey to another world. The shaman could cross that boundary, report back, and give meaning to chaos. Of course, if you strip away the awe, a shaman might also look a lot like the weird cousin who keeps insisting the fire told him a secret. But weirdness was valuable. In a world where survival depended on paying attention to every detail, the taste of a leaf, the change in an animal's track, the way smoke curled those who thought differently, sometimes saved lives. Their strangeness wasn't just tolerated, it was elevated. Better to have one person designated to chat with the invisible than to let everyone try and end up falling off cliffs. The shaman probably used every trick available. Smoke from burning herbs to set the mood, rhythmic drumming, clapping, or chanting to shift the brain into trance. Doses of mushrooms or that dangerous honey to push visions along. They guided their clan through altered states, not just for fun, but for purpose, to heal, to predict, to bond the community. Did they always succeed? Of course not. Some ceremonies ended with confusion or with someone stumbling around, insisting they were a bear now. But enough times, the shaman's work seemed to help. A fever broke, a hunt succeeded, grief felt lighter, and so their reputation grew. There's humor here, too. Imagine a shaman mid-trance, swaying, muttering to unseen spirits, when suddenly a child pipes up, "Are you just dizzy again?" Or picture a shaman trying to look solemn while covered in bee stings after a honey ritual went wrong. Even respected figures had bad days, but humor was part of the balance. The clan might laugh, but they also listened, because they knew that sometimes, under the theatrics, real knowledge lived. Shamans were humanity's first psychonauts, our early guides into the mind's deep caves. They were the ones who looked at fire and smoke and honey and thought, this isn't just survival, this is meaning. And even if their explanations were half performance and half revelation, they gave their people something essential, a way to navigate mystery without drowning in it. They were scientists without microscopes, therapists without couches, and occasionally stand-up comedians without meaning to be. So when you think of mad honey, think of the laughter and dizziness around ancient fires. And when you think of shamans, think of those same fires, but with someone standing a little apart, smoke curling around their face, their eyes fixed on something invisible. Both the honey and the shaman remind us that humans have always sought ways to step outside themselves, sometimes by accident, sometimes by design, and often with results that were equal parts profound and ridiculous. There is something about rhythm that goes deeper than thought. Before language could fully shape itself, before stories had sentences, humans had rhythm. The crack of sticks, the pounding of feet, the beating of palms against skin, stretched tight over a hollow log. These were the first conversations spoken in sound and motion. And when those rhythms mixed with altered states, with the smoke of herbs, the buzz of fermented fruit, or the shimmering colors of mushrooms, something remarkable happened. Dancing wasn't just moving anymore. It became a doorway, a ritual, a way of reaching out to the invisible. Picture a circle of firelight in a world where the night is truly dark, not city dark, with a faint orange glow on the horizon, but a darkness so complete it feels like velvet pressed against the eyes. Around the fire, people begin to sway. Maybe it starts with one person stamping their foot in time with their own heartbeat. Another joins in, slapping a rhythm against a hollow log. Someone else picks up a bone and rattles it with small stones inside. Soon the whole group is moving together, not just bodies, but a single organism, pulsing to a beat that grows faster, louder, more insistent. Now add the effects of plants or honey or smoke, and the boundaries between self and group begin to dissolve. The line between dancer and rhythm blurs. Time stretches. Hours pass in what feels like minutes, and the fire seems to rise and fall with the music. To an outside observer, if there were one, say, a confused mammoth peeking from the tree line, it might look chaotic, but to those inside the circle, it is not chaos at all. It is order of a higher kind, a weaving of breath and body into something larger than any individual. They are not just dancing, they are communing with spirits. This, anthropologists believe, is how ritual was born. Altered states showed humans that perception could be shifted, that the world wasn't always what it seemed. And dancing gave that shift a structure, a pattern. Together, the two formed a recipe for meaning. When people danced in groups under the influence of substances that blurred edges, they often reported visions, ancestors walking among them, animals speaking, gods or spirits showing approval or disapproval. These weren't private hallucinations. They were shared experiences. Everyone saw something similar, or at least believed they did, because they were primed by rhythm and movement and story to expect it. Imagine the clan after one of these nights. The next morning, bleary-eyed but buzzing, they sit around and compare notes. "Did you see the giant bird?" one asks. "Yes," says another. "It told me the hunt will be good." A third nods solemnly, adding, "And it told me to stop eating all the dried berries before anyone else gets a chance." Laughter follows, but the core message is serious. The spirits have spoken. The group now has a shared story, a new rule, a reason to cooperate. Out of the sweat and movement and smoke, a ritual has crystallized. And this is key. Rituals aren't just for fun. They serve purposes. They bond communities, give comfort in uncertainty, mark transitions like birth, death, or the start of a hunt. When people danced with spirits, they weren't only entertaining themselves, they were practicing survival in disguise. A group that could move together, breathe together, believe together, was stronger. Even if the spirits were just shadows on the inside of their minds, the belief in those spirits gave cohesion. That cohesion kept them alive. But there is also joy. Never underestimate joy. Some nights, the dancing was solemn, filled with the weight of visions. Other nights, it was pure release. Imagine living with constant danger, predators in the dark, hunger always gnawing at the edges, cold pressing against thin walls of skin and hide. A night of laughter and wild dancing wasn't just indulgence, it was medicine. It reminded the clan that life had sweetness, that the body could be more than a vessel for work and pain. It could be an instrument, a drum, a paintbrush against the canvas of night. And while this sounds lofty, let's be honest, a lot of early rituals probably looked like a prehistoric rave. People sweating, whooping, falling over, trying new moves that were less spiritual revelation and more, I just invented breakdancing, spirits or no spirits. The neighbors in the next valley probably shook their heads and said, well, that lot is at it again. But these rituals endured, and over time they grew more elaborate, with costumes, body paint, masks, and carefully planned sequences. What began as spontaneous dancing around a fire under the influence of smoke or honey became structured ceremonies, passed down through generations. The spirits had been invited, and once invited, they were never asked to leave. And humans weren't alone in this. Our ancestors weren't the only creatures on Earth to flirt with altered states. Long before scientists with clipboards, animals were the teachers. People watched them, puzzled and amused, and sometimes learned by imitation. Take elephants, for example. These massive, dignified giants, creatures that can live as long as us and remember better than most of us, have a taste for fermented fruit. In parts of Africa, marula trees drop their ripe fruit in abundance, and on hot days, the sun ferments the fallen bounty into a boozy mash. Elephants come to feast. A 6-ton elephant, munching fermented fruit, is not a delicate thing. It sways, it trumpets, it sometimes stumbles. Imagine watching that as a Stone Age human. You'd already respect elephants as powerful, almost godlike beings. And now here's one behaving like your uncle, after 3 gourds of honey brew. It must have been confusing. Was the elephant communing with spirits? Was it being punished? Or was this a sign that fermented fruit could be consumed without dying, provided you didn't mind acting a little silly? Monkeys offered lessons too. They're notorious for raiding fruit trees and sometimes stealing fermented drinks from villages, even today. A monkey with a belly full of alcohol is basically slapstick comedy, on legs rolling, fighting, laughing, falling out of trees. Early humans must have noticed, and perhaps they wondered, if our cousins can handle it, maybe so can we. Of course, handling it was relative. Monkeys also vomit spectacularly and pick fights with creatures much larger than themselves. Observing them may have been the first cautionary tale. Yes, you can eat the fruit that makes you feel funny, but no, you shouldn't climb trees while doing it. And then there are reindeer. In the Arctic, these animals are known to seek out and eat the fly, agaric, mushroom, the classic red and white toadstool you see in fairy tales. The result? Reindeer behave in ways that are not typical of reindeer. They stumble, prance, oddly, even appear to leap, as if trying to fly. For people living alongside them, watching herds of otherwise predictable animals suddenly act possessed must have been riveting. Some scholars believe this is how certain northern shamanic traditions discovered the mushrooms themselves. Humans saw the reindeer trip and thought, well, if it's good enough for dinner, on legs, maybe it's good enough for us. Of course, not all animal intoxication was inspirational. Sometimes it was a warning. Birds staggering after eating fermented berries, goats collapsing after chewing the wrong leaves. These were lessons written in feathers and fur. Our ancestors were observant. They noted which animals survived their indulgences, which ones suffered, and they learned. The forest was not only a pantry but a classroom, and animals were the unwitting professors, teaching through both success and failure. There's humor in this too. Imagine a group of humans gathered on a hillside, watching elephants swaying drunkenly below. They laugh until their sides ache, but they also take mental notes. Okay, that fruit doesn't kill them. Let's try it. But maybe not as much as the elephant ate, because we can't afford to spend tomorrow rolling around in the mud. In this way, animal behavior became not just entertainment but instruction, the foundation of our own experiments. So between the dancing humans and the staggering animals, the Stone Age must have been full of scenes, both profound and absurd. People found meaning in movement, rhythm, and shared visions. They watched the creatures around them and borrowed ideas. Out of this stew of curiosity and imitation grew rituals that endure in forms we still recognize today. Festivals, ceremonies, celebrations where music and altered states blur into something more than fun, something close to transcendence. The next time you see people dancing wildly at a concert, arms raised, eyes closed, lost in sound and rhythm, remember that they are echoing a pattern tens of thousands of years old. The spirits may no longer be called by name, but the ritual remains. And the animals, they're still teaching, still raiding fruit, still reminding us that intoxication is not just human, but universal, a part of life itself, acted out in fur, feathers, trunks, and antlers long before we carved masks or told myths. Of all the teachers our species has ever had, some of the first didn't lecture with words or scratch equations in the dirt. They didn't demand homework or invent chalkboards or give gold stars. They didn't even know they were teaching. They were animals, big ones, small ones, shaggy, feathered, antlered, and what they taught was sometimes hilarious, sometimes tragic, and always memorable. Long before humans had a word for intoxication, before we carved cups or toasted one another in celebration, we were watching other creatures stumble, sway, and occasionally faceplant their way into history. Animal behavior was a classroom we couldn't ignore, and in that classroom, elephants, monkeys, and reindeer were among the star professors. Imagine an ancient clearing under a hot Sunday. A marula tree has dropped its fruit in sticky golden heaps across the ground. The fruit is ripe to the point of collapse, sugar bubbling into fermentation, yeasts working like invisible brewers. A herd of elephants arrives, trunks swinging, ears flapping, and they start gobbling up the fallen bounty. At first, everything looks dignified. Elephants are stately creatures, after all, with a sense of grandeur. But after a while, something changes. One elephant sways a little too long before taking a step. Another trumpets with unusual enthusiasm, chasing a bird that's clearly mocking it. A calf tries to mimic its mother and ends up rolling in the fruit pile, squealing as if it's just discovered comedy. The herd is tipsy. Now, picture a group of humans watching from the tree line. These are people who already revere elephants. They see them as wise, strong, maybe even supernatural. But today, those mighty animals are staggering like clowns at a festival. The humans laugh, because how could they not? But behind the laughter is curiosity. If elephants can eat the fruit and live, maybe we can too. If elephants get a little wobbly, maybe the wobble is part of the fun. This is the first lesson. Fermented fruit can be consumed. The second lesson is subtler. Moderation matters. Because when one of the elephants collapses in the shade, groaning like it regrets everything, the humans also learn about limits. Elephants weren't the only furry professors. Monkeys, our close cousins, were even more obvious. They love fruit, and when fruit ferments, monkeys don't hesitate. To this day, in villages across parts of Africa, Asia, and South America, monkeys are notorious for raiding not just orchards, but breweries and bars. Give a monkey access to alcohol, and hilarity follows. They stagger, fall out of trees, pick fights with dogs, and then pass out dramatically, tails twitching in the dust. Early humans didn't need peer-reviewed studies to notice that monkeys could party too hard. And they noticed something else. Monkeys bounce back. A hangover, for a monkey, is brief. A nap, away from normal. For humans, though, not always. Watching monkeys may have encouraged people to try fermented foods, but it also gave them a cautionary tale. Don't assume your body will forgive you as easily as theirs. Picture it, a group of humans trying their first gourd of fermented berry juice. One man, inspired by the monkeys he saw the week before, insists he can handle as much as they can. The next morning, while everyone else is up gathering roots, he's curled under a bush, swearing he'll never eat anything sweet again. The others laugh at him, but they remember. They set mental notes. Monkeys are models, but not exact guides. They're more like pranksters who demonstrate what's possible, not necessarily what's advisable. Then we travel north into colder lands, where snow carpets the ground and forests stand dark and still. Here, reindeer roam. For most of the year, they graze on lichen and grass, steady, dependable, predictable. But in autumn, something curious happens. Bright red and white mushrooms sprout from the forest floor fly agaric, the iconic toadstool of fairy tales. The reindeer seek them out eagerly, noses twitching, hooves pawing snow to uncover the caps. They eat them, and then they change. Instead of calm grazing, the reindeer leap, run in circles, toss their heads wildly. Some stumble and fall, others prance, as though the ground has become a trampoline. To humans watching, it must have looked like possession. These animals that carried them through harsh winters, that provided hides and meat and tools, were suddenly acting like they'd joined a cosmic dance. What else could it mean? But that the mushrooms were powerful. People began to test, carefully at first, nibbling small amounts. Some had visions, some fell ill, and some declared they had spoken with gods. Over generations, traditions formed. Shamans used mushrooms in ceremonies, sometimes feeding them to reindeer, and then drinking the animal's urine to filter the toxins while keeping the visions. Yes, it sounds bizarre, but in a world without pharmacies, this was cutting-edge chemistry. Watching reindeer was how humans discovered a gateway into altered states that shaped entire cultures of the Arctic. Animals, then, weren't just companions or prey. They were guides. They showed humans which plants could intoxicate, which fruits could ferment, which substances could change perception. And humans, being humans, didn't just shrug and walk away. We imitated. We experimented. We turned accidents into traditions. A staggering elephant wasn't just funny, it was evidence. A drunk monkey wasn't just chaos, it was a possibility. A prancing reindeer wasn't just odd, it was a revelation. There's humor in all of this, of course. Imagine trying to convince your clan that it's okay to eat a mushroom because you saw a reindeer do it. Trust me, it'll be fine. And then, half an hour later, you're lying on your back, insisting the northern lights are speaking directly to you. Your clan laughs, but they don't forget. Next time, someone else tries. Eventually, they decide this mushroom is not just food, but a spirit messenger. Without the animals, maybe the leap wouldn't have happened. But there's seriousness too. Observing animal intoxication was part of survival. Some plants were deadly, others mildly disorienting, others potentially useful. Animals were test subjects that took risks humans couldn't afford to take blindly. When goats grazed on certain weeds and staggered but lived, humans marked those plants as dangerous but not instantly fatal. When birds ate certain berries and thrived, humans took note. When elephants could consume fermented fruit by the bushel, humans realized fruit wasn't just food. It could be transformation. In this way, animals were woven into the human story not just as meat or myth, but as mentors. They didn't know it, but they were shaping human culture, guiding our ancestors into the strange world of altered consciousness. And while some of the lessons were comical, all of them mattered. Because once people learned from animals, they began to push further, experimenting on their own. And out of those experiments came ritual, belief, and entire traditions. So the next time you see a video of a bear stealing apples from a backyard, or a moose eating fermented crabapples and wobbling through someone's garden, remember, this is not new. It is ancient. Humans have been watching animals get tipsy for tens of thousands of years. We laughed then. We laugh now. But tucked beneath the laughter is gratitude. Because without those lessons, our path into the world of spirits and rituals might have taken a little longer. The animals were our teachers, and they taught with no lectures, no punishments, no exams, just by living, eating, stumbling, and occasionally dancing under the influence of nature's strangest gifts. And if you're falling asleep now, let the image settle in your mind. Elephants swaying under the marula tree, monkeys giggling in the branches, reindeer leaping under northern lights. The forest is alive with lessons, and the classroom never closes. The first bad trip didn't begin with a warning label. There were no neat little lists of side effects, no stern voice advising, take only as directed. It began the way so many things in the Stone Age began with curiosity, a campfire, and somebody deciding to eat just a little more than they should have. Picture the scene. A small clan gathered in the evening, the fire painting their faces gold and red. They've had berries before, they've shared fermented fruit, and some of them have even tested the smoke of strange herbs. Spirits, visions, laughter, all these things have drifted through their nights. Tonight feels no different until one overeager participant decides that if a small handful of mushrooms made him see patterns in the stars last week, then surely 2 handfuls will let him talk to the stars directly. The logic is impeccable, at least to him, and so down they go, chewed quickly, while the others watch with a mixture of admiration and concern. For a little while, he's fine. He laughs at the firelight, points at the moon like it's a mischievous cousin, and tells a joke that isn't funny, but somehow makes everyone laugh anyway. Then, the change begins. His eyes widen too much. His breathing quickens. And suddenly, he's not just seeing patterns. He's seeing predators in the shadows, giant claws swiping at him from the tree line. His body jerks as though to dodge blows no one else can see. The laughter fades into an awkward silence. A child starts to cry. And that's when the clan turns to the healer. The healer's job wasn't easy on the best of days. She was midwife, doctor, counselor, keeper of plant knowledge, and often referee when disputes broke out. Tonight she becomes babysitter to a man convinced the earth is swallowing him whole. Calmly, she approaches, even as he yells about snakes under his skin. She murmurs words. The clan doesn't entirely understand, but finds soothing anyway. She places her hand on his chest, steadying his frantic heartbeat, then signals to others to bring water and warm hides. Slowly, she guides him back from the brink, though it takes the whole night and more patience than most mortals have. That was the first recorded bad trip, recorded not in writing, but in the memory of a community that would retell the story for years. It became a cautionary tale. Don't take too much, don't go in alone, and always have someone who knows what they're doing nearby. The healer, though exhausted, added another chapter to her internal book of remedies. A new plant might help calm panic. A certain rhythm on the drum could slow racing thoughts. Gentle touch, warm wraps, and careful breathing all became tools as important as spears and fire. And yet, for all the terror, the clan learned. They learned that altered states could turn dark, that visions could be overwhelming instead of enlightening. They learned that support mattered, that community could hold someone together when their own mind was trying to fly apart. The man himself, once he recovered, probably laughed about it in time, though the laughter may have been more relief than humor. And the healer, though never thanked enough, was the quiet hero who carried him through the night. From those early episodes, a pattern emerged. Humans didn't stop experimenting just because one person had a bad trip. If anything, they experimented more carefully, and they built rituals around the experience to minimize risk. Ceremonies with set doses, guided chants, and the presence of experienced elders. All of these were born from the realization that the mind could just as easily trap you in a nightmare as open you to wonder. But of course, not every lesson stuck. Sometimes curiosity barged past caution, and that's when the dangerous doses came into play. The line between medicine and poison has always been thin. A root that eases pain in small amounts can stop a heart in large ones. A berry that brings euphoria at one handful can bring paralysis at two. Our ancestors didn't know the chemical names, but they understood the principle through hard experience. Dangerous doses were teachers, too, though they were the kind of teachers nobody wanted to sit through twice. Take, for example, the first time someone discovered a plant with numbing qualities. Chewed lightly, it dulled a toothache, giving blessed relief in a world with no dentists. But chewed greedily, it made lips tingle, then made the chest heavy, then stole away breath itself. That was a lesson carved deep into memory. This plant is powerful, and respect is the only safe way to use it. Or consider fermented honey, sweet and intoxicating. A sip was pleasant. 2 sips brought laughter, but a gourd drained to the bottom could send a man sprawling into unconsciousness, his pulse slow, his breath shallow. The clan would hover, wondering if he would wake, and sometimes he did not. Dangerous doses were brutal in their instruction, but they were unforgettable. Word spread, not just within one clan, but from valley to valley. By the time groups met at seasonal gatherings, stories of overdoses traveled too. Don't eat too much of that mushroom. Don't drink too deep of that honey. Don't trust the pretty red berries, no matter how inviting they look. And yet, humans being humans, some couldn't resist pushing limits. There were always daredevils, always people convinced they could handle more. Sometimes they became shamans, celebrated for their visions. Other times, they became cautionary legends, remembered in whispers around the fire. One man's boast of bravery became another man's bedtime warning. Don't be like him, or you'll end up chasing imaginary bears until your heart gives out. The healer, again, was central. She was the one who measured doses, not in milligrams, but in pinches and breaths. She was the one who knew which plants were safe only when mixed with others, which herbs needed to be boiled first, which mushrooms were strictly off limits, unless you enjoyed screaming at shadows. Without her, Dangerous doses would have claimed more lives. With her, the clan walked a line between knowledge and disaster, learning enough to expand their world, but not so recklessly that it destroyed them. There is humor here too, because bad trips and overdoses weren't always tragic. Sometimes they were ridiculous. Imagine a man who eats too many mushrooms and spends the night insisting his hands have turned into fish, flopping them at everyone who comes near. The healer sighs, wraps him in a hide, and tells the others to let him get it out of his system. The next day he's sheepish, but the clan teases him for months, making fish-flopping gestures whenever he tries to be serious. Dangerous doses could bring death, yes, but they could also bring comedy, the kind that bonded a group through shared absurdity. Over time, humans learned to build boundaries around their experiments. Rituals were one boundary, setting times and places and doses. Social rules were another. Don't indulge alone. Don't mix substances. Don't take more than your share. These were the beginnings of what we might now call harm reduction, though back then it was just called survival. Dangerous doses shaped culture just as surely as good harvests and successful hunts. They taught restraint, respect, and the importance of having someone sober enough to watch the fire while the others drifted off to talk to spirits. So when you think of bad trips and overdoses, don't just think of disaster. Think of the lessons they etched into memory. Think of the healers who held shaking hands, of the communities that carried their members through, of the humor that softened the fear. Think of the way those early mistakes laid the foundation for rituals that endure even now, in temples and ceremonies, and even in quiet personal reflection. And as you drift into sleep, imagine a fire long ago, a clan gathered close, and a healer sitting awake through the night, watching over someone lost in visions too heavy for them. Outside, the stars wheel silently overhead. Inside, patience and compassion keep chaos from winning. Those first bad trips, those dangerous doses they were part of, how we learned not just what the world could offer, but how fragile and resilient the human mind could be. Long before laboratories and pharmacies, long before pills came in tidy plastic bottles, with instructions printed in fonts too small to read without squinting, the real medicine cabinet was the landscape itself. Plants were everywhere, standing tall in meadows, clinging to cliffs, carpeting forests, and hiding their secrets in roots, bark, leaves, and flowers. For early humans, these plants were more than background scenery. They were experiments waiting to happen, some of them miraculous, others mischievous, and a few, flat out, deadly. People didn't know chemical formulas, but they knew observation, curiosity, and the occasional willingness to chew on something strange and see what happened. That's how they found the plants with power, the flora that bent reality, tickled the senses, or cracked open the door between ordinary life and something otherworldly. The first lesson must have been taste. Plants talk in flavors, and bitterness was usually nature's polite way of saying, "I could kill you." You know, sweetness was safer, though not always. Some plants tasted mild and did nothing, like chewing on a handful of grass, a kind of prehistoric chewing gum, except it got stuck in your teeth and made you look like a confused cow. Other plants packed a punch. One leaf could ease pain. One root could knock you flat. A flower might make your vision swim with color, while another might send you running for the bushes in a hurry that was anything but spiritual. Imagine a clan discovering datura. The plant looks innocent enough, with its trumpet-shaped flowers, glowing white in the moonlight. But chew too many seeds, and suddenly, the moonlight isn't just lighting the clearing, it's whispering your name. Datura is powerful, hallucinogenic, and unpredictable. It became infamous in later centuries for inducing wild visions, sometimes accompanied by the unnerving sensation of flying. For early humans, stumbling across it would have been equal parts terrifying and mesmerizing. A young man might wander into the night, convinced he was being chased by spirit animals, while the healer kept a stern eye on him and muttered under her breath about people who didn't listen when she said, "Just one seed." Then there were morning glories, their seeds tiny but potent, containing chemicals that later cultures would recognize as close cousins to LSD. Early foragers may have collected them by accident, mistaking them for food. A handful could lead to stomach cramps, yes, but also to visions that bent the forest into spirals of sound and light. Someone might stumble back to camp, describing rivers flowing upward and stars dripping down like rain. Everyone else would shake their heads, but take note. These seeds weren't for eating like nuts or grains. They were for seeing things no one else could. And then there were mushrooms. Not all mushrooms. Of course, some were dinner, some were death, and some were doorways. Certain species contained compounds that played with perception, stretching time, blending sounds into colors, turning firelight into living beings. A cautious clan might avoid them, after one unlucky soul spent the night, convinced the ground was breathing. A bolder clan might decide they were gifts from the spirit world and keep them for special occasions. Either way, mushrooms left an impression. Other plants joined the catalogue of power. Cannabis, with its resinous leaves, may have been thrown into fires, releasing smoke that relaxed the body and made laughter bloom. Tobacco, though harsh at first, gave a buzz that sharpened or blurred the senses, depending on how it was used. Poppies, beautiful with their scarlet petals, hid a secret in their pods. Sap, that could numb pain so effectively, it seemed like a miracle. Imagine a woman in childbirth being given poppy juice to ease her agony, or a hunter nursing a broken leg, soothed by the same plant. That kind of discovery wasn't just curiosity, it was survival. Of course, for every plant with hidden gifts, there were plenty of duds. People chewed on bark that tasted like cardboard and did nothing. They boiled leaves that smelled promising, but only produced bitter tea that made everyone gag. They gnawed on stems that left their mouths dry and their pride bruised when nothing happened at all. Trial and error wasn't just a scientific method. It was an endless comedy of chewing and spitting, of hopeful glances exchanged around the fire, followed by disappointed sighs. And yet, slowly, knowledge grew. Elders became libraries of plant lore, passing on what worked, what didn't, and what should never be tried again unless you wanted to meet your ancestors sooner than planned. They knew which plants could open the mind and which would shut it down. They wove that knowledge into ritual, story, and warning. Plants with power weren't just curiosities. They became bridges to something larger than life, shaping belief systems and ceremonies that tied communities together for generations. But perhaps the most important effect wasn't what the plants did to individuals. It was what they did to groups. Because when the fire burned low and the herbs were shared, when smoke drifted upward and laughter spread across the circle, the plants shaped not just perception, but community itself. Picture a cold night with the wind pressing against the walls of a crude shelter. Inside, the clan gathers around the fire, Food has been eaten, tools put away, and the work of the day is done. Now comes the sharing. A gourd of fermented fruit passes from hand to hand. Someone tosses herbs into the flames, sending fragrant smoke curling through the air. The group leans closer, inhaling together, the heat painting their cheeks. Slowly, conversation shifts. The worries of the day, whether the hunt will succeed, whether the weather will turn fall, into the background. In their place rises laughter, storytelling, and the kind of ideas that only appear when the mind is loosened from its usual grip. Substances became social glue. They turned the circle into a family, not just a group of individuals surviving side by side. Under their influence, stories were told with greater flourish, and everyone felt like part of the performance. Music grew wilder, with hands slapping drums and feet stomping in rhythm. Dances turned from stiff movements into flowing expressions. Everyone caught in the same pulse. Even silence was shared, comfortable rather than awkward, as if the group had learned to breathe in unison. It was around the fire that bonds deepened. The hunter who spent the day alone in the forest returned not just with meat, but with a place in the circle. The child who asked endless questions finally fell asleep against a parent's shoulder, soothed by the hum of voices and the smell of smoke. The elder, who carried memories stretching back decades, shared wisdom in the form of stories, each one landing with more weight because the listeners were softened, open, receptive. The plants didn't just shape individuals, they shaped the rhythm of community life. Of course, not every gathering was solemn or mystical. Many nights must have been rowdy, with people laughing too hard, singing off key, and teasing one another until their sides hurt. But even in those moments, something profound was happening. Humor is a bond, too, and when the whole group laughed together, it forged unity, stronger than stone. The next day's hunt was easier because everyone trusted one another a little more. The work of building shelters felt lighter because jokes from the night before still echoed. The substances, whether mild or strong, gave the group excuses to connect in ways that might not have happened otherwise. And as the fire crackled low and the last embers glowed, the circle would slowly drift towards sleep. Some curled close to the warmth, others stretched out beneath the stars, but all carried the memory of that shared time. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight they had been together, not just surviving, but belonging. The plants had played their role, loosening the edges of the day, turning strangers into companions, companions into family. So as you drift now, imagine yourself by that ancient fire. The smoke curls gently upward. The taste of something sweet lingers on your tongue. Around you, voices murmur in laughter and song, blending with the crackle of wood. You feel safe, warm, and part of something larger than yourself. The plants with power have done their work, and the bonds around the fire hold you close. Sleep comes, not as an intruder, but as another guest in the circle, welcomed and inevitable. There is a moment when you are drifting off to sleep, where the mind plays tricks on you. You think you are still awake, and then suddenly, you're not. A shadow at the edge of the room becomes an animal. A whisper of wind becomes a voice, and the dream and the waking world fold into each other, as if they were stitched from the same cloth. For us, this is just a quirk of the brain, a sleep state slip that happens as we nod off on mattresses with alarm clocks glowing by our side. But for people living tens of thousands of years ago, this blurring was not a mistake. It was the very terrain of the sacred. To dream was to travel. It was to enter another realm where ancestors could be consulted, where animals could speak, where the laws of gravity and hunger and cold no longer applied. A dream could bring guidance, warnings, even instructions for survival. And when substances entered, the story smokes inhaled, plants chewed, honey fermented, the dreamlike quality spilled into daylight. Suddenly, you didn't have to wait for sleep. You could go questing into visions with your eyes open, and it was called a vision quest. Imagine a young member of the clan, sent away from the fire, on the cusp of adulthood. They walk out with nothing but a hide to sit on and a small pouch of herbs. The hunger that gnaws at them after days of fasting sharpens every sound, the creak of branches, the rush of a river, the cry of a bird. They chew the bitter seeds or inhale the acrid smoke, and suddenly the line between reality and dream dissolves like mist. The bird is no longer just a bird. Its wings move in slow arcs that carry meaning. Its call stretches into a sentence. You are not prey, the hawk might say. You are hunter. When they return to camp, pale, exhausted, and wild-eyed, the clan gathers to hear the tale. The shaman leans forward. The hawk spoke? Yes. Then it is your spirit guide. You are Hawk's child now. You carry its swiftness, its patience, its sharp sight. And though the shaman may privately think the young one was hallucinating after chewing too many seeds, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the experience gives the youth a new identity, a story to hold on to in a world that often feels merciless. The blurred line gives shape to the chaos. The funny thing is, some visions were not so noble. Fasting and substances didn't always summon animal spirits or ancestors. Sometimes they summoned absurdity. One poor soul might return, claiming they were chased through the forest by a giant rabbit. Another might insist that a stump gave them a lengthy lecture on morality. The clan would laugh, of course, but even those ridiculous visions were not wasted. They became part of oral tradition, woven into mythology, half serious and half joke. Maybe that stump really did contain a spirit. Maybe the rabbit had lessons too, even if those lessons were mostly, don't eat so many mushrooms. Modern science tells us that dreaming and altered states overlap in fascinating ways. The brain loosens its grip on strict logic and lets patterns float free. It connects ideas that normally stay separate. That's why dreams create impossible mashups, and why visions can feel like revelations. Sometimes, the revelation is profound, a new hunting strategy, or the realization that community matters more than pride. Sometimes the revelation is absurd, like believing you've sprouted antlers. But either way, the altered brain provides novelty, and novelty keeps a species sharp. Think of the clan gathered at the fire the next day, listening to the vision tale. Some take it seriously, nodding and murmuring. Some smile, suppressing laughter, but all remember it. The dream quest is not just the individual's, it becomes collective property. It guides choices, sparks jokes, builds bonds. Dreaming and reality blur not only in the mind of the visionary, but in the life of the whole group. And so it went, night after night, generation after generation. People didn't separate dream from reality the way we do now. They didn't dismiss visions as just the brain firing off nonsense. They treated them as encounters with truth, sometimes terrifying, sometimes comforting, sometimes hilarious. Dreams were not interruptions of reality. They were a second reality, one you could walk into, and sometimes stumble back from, with very strange stories. If you think comedy is modern, think again. Humor was there around the very first campfires, and altered states practically guaranteed it. Give a group of tired hunter-gatherers a little fermented fruit, or a puff of smoke from strange herbs. And you had yourself the original late-night comedy club, except the stage was dirt, the spotlight was a fire, and hecklers were wolves howling in the distance. Picture this: a man stares at his hands after chewing mushrooms. Slowly, with utter seriousness, he announces, "They've turned into fish." He flops them dramatically in the air, gasping, demanding that others bring water before his new fish hands dry out. The entire clan bursts into laughter, tears streaming, bellies aching. The joke doesn't end there. For weeks afterward, whenever he tries to give advice or appear wise, someone wiggles their hands and says, "Careful, the fish need watering." That's not just a joke. That's the first meme. A shared memory, repeated and reshaped, traveling through time in laughter. Another night, a woman insists the fire is whispering cooking tips directly to her. She leans close, nodding seriously, thanking the flames for their advice. Everyone stares, wide-eyed, impressed by her connection to the spirit world. The next morning, she burns the stew beyond recognition. The laughter is unstoppable. "Did the fire tell you to do that?" they tease. From then on, she is known affectionately as the one who takes recipes from smoke. Accidental comedy was everywhere. Shamans in trance sometimes fell over spectacularly, their solemnity shattered in a cloud of dust. Children mimicked their elders' ceremonies, exaggerating every gesture, until even the elders couldn't help laughing. And those who panicked during a bad trip became legends, not in a cruel way, but as cautionary clowns. One man might spend hours convinced his shadow was trying to kill him. For months afterward, people act out mock battles with their own shadows, roaring with laughter at the memory. The importance of humor in those altered states can't be overstated. Substances and visions could be frightening, overwhelming, but laughter was a pressure valve, a reminder that not everything needed to be taken so seriously. It pulled panicked minds back from the edge, reminding them they were safe, surrounded by friends. The healer might soothe with touch and words, but the clan soothed with comedy. Together, they created a balance: seriousness and silliness, awe and laughter, both necessary for survival. And this is how memes were born, not in glowing screens, but in oral tradition. Every funny incident was retold, exaggerated, passed down. A tripper who danced wildly one night became the inventor of the wind dance, imitated for years afterward. A hunter who once declared himself king of the stars after drinking too much honey brew became a running gag, saluted every time someone looked up. Inside jokes became traditions. They were markers of identity, bonds that made people feel part of something larger. Humor also trained memory. People remembered plants not only by their effects, but by the jokes attached. The mushroom that made someone flop like a fish, easy to recall. The honey that made someone try to kiss a bear, no one forgot that. Comedy became an educational tool, disguising survival knowledge in laughter. So imagine it: a Stone Age comedy night. The fire crackles, the air smells of herbs and roasted roots. Someone stands, acting out the memory of last week's mishap, while the rest roll with laughter, some doubled over, some wiping tears from their eyes. In the background, children giggle and try to mimic the jokes. The humor is simple, physical, and endlessly repeated. But it does more than entertain. It binds, it teaches, it heals. Comedy wasn't a distraction from ritual. It was part of it. Spirits could be honored with laughter, as much as with solemnity. Life was brutal, unpredictable, and short. To laugh at it was not disrespectful. It was defiance. It was survival in another form. So as you drift to sleep now, picture yourself in that circle. On one side, someone is describing a noble vision of a hawk. On the other, someone is pretending their hands are fish. The clan roars, the fire crackles, the stars shimmer above. Seriousness and silliness mingle, just as dreaming and waking blur. Humor, vision, fear, and joy, all woven together into the great story of survival. One of the great secrets of human survival isn't just sharper spears or warmer hides, or the ability to make a fire when the night air turned cruel. It's creativity. The same spark that made someone wonder whether a rock could be sharpened into a blade also made someone else wonder if chewing on that strange-smelling leaf might make them feel better after a long day. And every so often, the experiments with herbs, roots, and fermented fruits didn't just produce laughter or dizziness, they produced ideas. Altered states had a way of pushing the mind sideways, loosening the grip of routine thought, and sometimes that sideways step was exactly what humanity needed. Imagine the clan gathered around the fire. It's the end of a long hunt. They are tired, sore, and hungry. But tonight, there's an extra treat, a gourd of fermented fruit, bubbling faintly with the power of invisible yeast. The first sips bring warmth to the body and lightness to the mind. Soon, conversation is flowing like the river after spring rains. Someone, normally quiet, begins to talk about how the way branches fall across each other in the forest looks a lot like the frame of the hut they live in. What if, he says, slurring just slightly, we used bent branches instead of straight ones for the roof? It would be stronger, like the ribs of a deer. Others laugh, but the next day they try it. And wouldn't you know it works? A better shelter, discovered in the afterglow of a Stone Age brainstorming session. The mind under influence doesn't always wander toward wisdom, of course. Sometimes it wanders into odd cul-de-sacs. Perhaps someone insists that if you dance in a circle around the fire while holding a bone in your teeth, the mammoths will walk directly into your traps. This idea is tested, and shockingly, it fails. But even failed experiments are remembered. And in time, the clan learns to separate silly ideas from useful ones, without ever losing the courage to keep testing. Altered states encouraged connection making. A hunter might notice that the spiral patterns on a seashell look like the eddies of water in a stream, and then wonder if both follow some unseen rule. He might not be able to articulate what we now call mathematics, but he senses order in chaos, and that sense eventually feeds into tool design, into the rhythm of drums, into the carving of symbols on stone. It's a long road from giggling around a fire to geometry, but every road has its first step. There were practical benefits too. Imagine the healer faced with a wounded hunter. The usual treatments aren't working. The bleeding won't stop. The pain won't ease. In desperation, she chews on a leaf. She's seen animals nibbling when they limp. Her perception shifts. She begins to imagine how fibers from the plant could be twisted into a cord to tie around the wound. It's not just the plant's chemistry at work, it's the altered state, loosening her thinking, allowing her to see connections she would otherwise have missed. The hunter survives, and the healer gains not only a new treatment, but a new way of approaching problems. Creativity born of substances also seeped into art. Paintings on cave walls, etched patterns in bone, beads strung into necklaces. These weren't just decorations. They were experiments in meaning. A person who stared at flickering firelight under the influence might begin to see animals moving in the shadows, and later try to capture those movements in ochre and charcoal on stone. When others saw the images, they gasped, recognizing their world made visible in a new way. The line between vision and art blurred, and art became a way of storing visions for the future. And then there's music, the steady beat of a drum, the drone of a hollowed bone flute, the rhythmic clapping of hands. All of these grew richer when people were open to unusual ideas. Someone high on honey brew might decide to stretch animal skin across a log just to see what sound it makes. It booms like thunder. Soon, that booming is added to the nightly dances, and the dances themselves grow wilder, more intricate, more joyful. Creativity thrives in loosened minds, and loosened minds gave birth to culture. The strange thing is, not all weird ideas were weird in hindsight. To the people who first thought them, they probably sounded laughable. What if we tied a rock to a stick and threw it instead of just hurling the rock? Ridiculous. Surely until it worked, and the first spear changed hunting forever. What if we dried meat in the sun instead of eating it all right away? Wasteful, until months later, when the dried meat fed the clan through a famine. Substances didn't invent these ideas, but they sometimes gave people the nudge to consider possibilities that routine thought wouldn't. Even laughter itself, born from silly, tripping humor, had survival value. A group that laughed together bonded together, and a group that bonded was more likely to cooperate, to share food, to protect one another. Weird ideas weren't just tolerated, they were cherished. Because even if 19 out of 20 were nonsense, the 20th might be the difference between life and death. So while we might laugh at the thought of our ancestors stumbling around under the stars, convinced they were part bear, or that the fire was giving cooking advice, the truth is that creativity saved them. Altered states cracked the shell of routine and let imagination spill out. And imagination, more than muscle, more than speed, is what kept humanity alive long enough to reach this moment where you can lie back, listening to these words, and drift towards sleep, knowing that the very act of dreaming is part of that ancient gift. Of course, curiosity has sharp teeth. For every triumphant discovery that kept humans alive, there were experiments that went very, very wrong. And it's not hard to picture them. A clan finds a patch of berries, plump and glistening, too tempting to resist. Someone takes a bite. At first, nothing. Then the stomach cramps begin, sweat beads on the forehead, and soon, the unfortunate pioneer is doubled over while everyone else watches in horror. "Don't eat those," the healer says grimly, as if anyone needs the reminder. Curiosity can save, but it can also poison. Plants didn't evolve to please humans. Many evolved defenses to keep animals away. Bitter tastes, irritating oils, toxic compounds. Our ancestors didn't know chemical names like alkaloids or glycosides, but they learned their effects the hard way. Some toxins made hearts race until they stopped. Others paralyzed. Some caused violent hallucinations, the kind where people saw monsters where there were none, or shadows creeping out of their own skin. The healer's job often meant sitting with the poisoned, fanning them with hides, whispering comfort as the clan prayed for survival. And many didn't survive. Even when plants weren't lethal, they could bring on terror. Imagine someone chewing datura seeds. The world tilts. Shapes slither where there are none. Friends look like enemies. The fire seems to hiss insults. Panic surges, and the person bolts into the night, convinced they are being hunted. Others chase after them, trying to prevent them from running straight into a ravine. The night that began with curiosity ends in chaos, and afterward, the story becomes a warning. Don't chew the moonflower seeds, they'll say, unless you want the spirits to chase you. Sometimes the risk wasn't even chemical, it was psychological. Substances that blurred reality could tip fragile minds into terror. A dose too strong, a vision too dark, and paranoia set in. The trees themselves seemed to lean close, whispering threats. The ground might feel alive, breathing beneath your feet, and in those moments, community was the only lifeline. The healer's calm, the clan's laughter, the safety of many hands without those. Paranoia could spiral until the person was lost in fear. Animals provided warnings, too. People noticed goats that staggered after grazing, birds that dropped from trees after eating certain berries, insects that avoided particular flowers. But not all warnings were heeded. Hunger and boldness drove experiments anyway, and mistakes were inevitable. Every family likely lost someone to a poisonous plant at some point. The memory of those losses hardened into taboos, rituals, and strict rules. Knowledge was written, not in books, but in funerals. And yet, humans kept pushing, because curiosity is stubborn. The same impulse that led to poisoning also led to breakthroughs, but the risks were never forgotten. Stories grew around them. A child might be warned not with dry advice, but with a tale of an ancestor who ate the wrong root and spent 3 nights fighting invisible wolves. Paranoia became mythology. Panic became parable. Knowledge was passed on with a shiver, a laugh, and sometimes a scar. So as much as curiosity expanded the human world, it also carried danger. The clan lived, balanced on that knife's edge, learning which plants healed, which plants inspired visions, and which ones punished recklessness with suffering. The risks of curiosity shaped culture as much as the benefits, because each bad outcome carved a boundary, a reminder that the world was not endlessly forgiving. And in this way, curiosity and caution grew up together. One without the other would have doomed humanity. Curiosity gave the boldness to try. Caution kept the survivors alive long enough to remember. And those memories became our inheritance, so that now you can drift safely into sleep without needing to wonder whether the root by your pillow might turn your dreams into nightmares. Your ancestors already took that risk, sometimes paying dearly, so you wouldn't have to. The funny thing about the Stone Age is that the people themselves are long gone, but their mess lingers. We don't have their diaries, no neat cave-inscribed journals where someone wrote, "Dear Rock Wall, tonight I tried the mushrooms again and ended up talking to a bear-shaped cloud." What we do have are fragments, scraps, residues left behind, like breadcrumbs scattered across tens of thousands of years. Archaeology is detective work played at a glacial pace, and sometimes the tiniest clue is enough to open a whole world. Take bones, for example. Human bones tell stories, whether they want to or not. Teeth carry wear patterns that whisper of diets heavy with fibrous plants. But sometimes, chemical analysis shows traces of unusual compounds, alkaloids, and plant residues that don't come from ordinary food. A jawbone from thousands of years ago can reveal that someone chewed a plant with pain-killing properties, or a root that altered perception. In one skeleton, the enamel might contain microscopic crystals of charred seeds, carried there in smoke. That's the evidence not of eating, but of inhaling. a silent testimony that fire and herbs were being combined in ways far beyond cooking. Tools carry their own gossip. A stone mortar, worn smooth at the bottom, may have been used to grind grains into flour, but sometimes analysis reveals particles of plants with no nutritional value, plants that were bitter or even toxic. Why grind those unless someone wanted to extract their effects? Archaeologists scrape the crevices of these ancient tools and find residue of cannabis, opium poppies, blue lotus, even coca leaves. Each one a signature, a fingerprint of altered states stretching back into prehistory. The ancients didn't leave footnotes, but they left pollen grains stuck in the corners of stone bowls. And those grains speak louder than words. Even pipes and vessels show up in the record, though the earliest ones don't look like the sleek, obvious pipes of later centuries. Some are hollowed bones, simple tubes that might have been whistles, or might have been primitive smoking devices. When residue testing finds nicotine or cannabis clinging stubbornly to the interior, the whistle theory fades and the image sharpens. Someone sitting by a fire, drawing smoke through a hollow bone, coughing, then laughing, then staring at the stars, like they'd just been personally introduced. Residue clings not only to tools, but to the walls of caves. In certain ceremonial sites, archaeologists have discovered blackened soot enriched with unusual compounds. When torches burned ordinary wood, the soot was ordinary too. But in some sacred caves, the chemical profile suggests that herbs and resins were burned deliberately to create fragrant, mind-bending smoke. Picture a group of people painting animals on the walls by torchlight, while resins smoldered behind them. The flickering light, the shifting smoke, the rhythm of drums, art, environment, and chemistry, all colliding into one overwhelming vision. Those paintings, still vivid after tens of thousands of years, may themselves be residue of altered perception. Even the garbage heaps, the ancient trash piles, called middens, tell tales. Seeds of psychoactive plants show up far from where those plants naturally grew, meaning they were carried, deliberately, traded, and valued. A midden on one continent might contain seeds from hundreds of miles away, proof that someone hauled them across rugged terrain because they mattered enough. These weren't weeds plucked by accident. They were cultural treasures, traded like precious stones, except their value wasn't in their sparkle, but in the visions they produced. Skeletal injuries offer another kind of evidence. Some skulls bear signs of trepanation holes, drilled deliberately into the bone. To us, it looks horrifying, but many of those skulls show signs of healing, meaning the people survived. Why drill into a skull unless you believed it would release something trapped inside, or open a channel to the spirit world? Perhaps substances used during those procedures dulled pain or intensified visions. It is chilling and fascinating to imagine someone lying still, herbs numbing their senses, while another carefully cuts into bone in the belief that healing or enlightenment waits on the other side. The work of archaeologists today often involves microscopes, chromatography, and spectrometers, but sometimes it's as simple as standing in a cave and noticing how sound echoes or how light dances on stone. Imagine a space where chants reverberate, firelight flickers, and smoke curls against the walls, where ancient residues confirm that substances were indeed burned. In such places, archaeologists realize that ritual wasn't abstract. It was physical, sensory, chemical. The cave itself was a tool, and the residue is its instruction manual. The strongest evidence of all, though, may be continuity. When archaeologists uncover residues of cannabis in 10,000-year-old fires in Central Asia, or coca in South American sites just as ancient, and we know those plants are still used ceremonially today, it ties a thread between now and then. The practices didn't appear, in the modern world, out of nowhere. They stretch back into the Stone Age, anchored in charred seeds, sticky resins, stained bowls, and bones that still carry whispers of smoke. This evidence doesn't just prove that substances were used. It shows how deeply woven they were into human culture. The traces aren't in random spots. They're concentrated in burial sites, ceremonial caves, ritual centers. That tells us these plants weren't casual snacks. They were part of the sacred, tools for reaching beyond the ordinary, preserved in bones, and tools like messages, waiting patiently for thousands of years. If archaeology gives us the hard evidence, mythology gives us the echoes. Long after the bones are buried and the fire's gone cold, stories ripple forward. They change names and costumes, but the outlines are familiar. Humans reaching out to gods, spirits, or other worlds through plants, smoke, and drink. Myths are like the dream journals of civilizations, recording not exact details, but the impressions left by centuries of altered states. Take the Greeks and their tales of ambrosia and nectar, foods of the gods that conferred immortality and divine vision. These weren't just flowery inventions. They echo the Stone Age discovery that some plants or substances made people feel lifted, invincible, glowing with ideas. What is ambrosia but fermented honey, the mead that made laughter louder and visions sharper? In India, the Vedas sing of soma, a mysterious drink that opened minds to cosmic truths. Scholars have argued for centuries about what soma was. Maybe a mushroom, maybe a plant brewed into intoxicating liquid. Whatever its identity, the memory it preserves is clear. Altered states were sacred, doorways to wisdom, and worth encoding into myth. The fact that soma is remembered as divine shows how powerful those experiences were. In Norse tradition, there is the mead of poetry, a magical brew said to bestow wisdom and inspiration. One sip, and you could become a poet, your words flowing like rivers. Behind the myth, you can almost see a Stone Age gathering where fermented honey sent ideas bubbling out, where someone who was normally quiet suddenly became eloquent, speaking with a fluency that astonished the group. To them, it must have seemed magical. To us, it looks like alcohol, unlocking inhibitions. To mythology, it became the gift of gods. Even the idea of talking animals in myth, foxes, snakes, birds offering advice, feels like a direct echo of vision quests. How many times had a Stone Age youth, weakened by fasting and spurred by plants, returned, claiming that a hawk spoke to them? Enough times, it seems, that whole cultures later built myths where animals were messengers of the divine. Shamanic traditions across Siberia, the Americas, and Africa carry stories of flying through the air, visiting other worlds, speaking with ancestors. Mushrooms like fly agaric make the body feel light, the mind feel unmoored. The visions of flight, the sensation of leaving the body, may have been terrifying at first, but over generations, they became codified into myth. The shaman wasn't just tripping. They were literally flying to the spirit world. And the myth remembers what the experience felt like, even if the details blurred. Myth also preserved warnings. Tales of trickster spirits who lured humans with food or drink that turned to poison are echoes of overdoses and toxic plants. Stories of gods punishing mortals for stealing forbidden fruit may recall early experiments gone wrong, where someone chewed the wrong berry and paid with their life. To remember the risks, cultures wrapped them in morality plays, ensuring the lesson was carried forward. And then there are the creation myths, where the world itself was dreamed or sung into being. Isn't that the ultimate echo of an altered state? To sit by a fire, eyes wide, under the influence of plants, and feel that the entire universe is unfolding from a song you hear in your own chest. Later, retold as myth, it becomes, the gods sang and the world was born. But maybe, once upon a time, it was simply a vision under the stars, blurred between dream and reality. What makes these echoes fascinating is their universality. From Greece to India, from the Arctic to the equator, cultures remembered food and drink that lifted them into the realm of the divine. They remembered talking animals, flying shamans, intoxicating nectars, trickster spirits, cosmic songs. They remembered because these experiences were central, unforgettable, and shaped the way humans saw themselves in the universe. The myths changed details, but preserved the core, that substances could open the door between human and divine, between earth and sky, between the living and the dead. So when you listen to myths, imagine them not as fiction, but as echoes of fireside nights in the Stone Age. Imagine the laughter, the awe, the panic, the relief. Imagine visions too strange to fade, carried forward in stories until they became eternal. And as you drift into your own dreams tonight, you carry that same inheritance, the blurred line where imagination, memory, and meaning swirl together. Just as it did for your ancestors, and just as mythology has been telling us all along. If a Stone Age hunter-gatherer could step into our world today, blinking at the neon lights and traffic signals and supermarket aisles with 50 brands of bread, one thing might feel oddly familiar. It wouldn't be smartphones or airplanes or even skyscrapers. It would be the quiet little rituals we still have around substances. Coffee mugs, clutched in the morning like holy chalices. Glasses raised in toasts at weddings. People sneaking outside at parties to share something smoked in a circle, coughing and laughing just as their ancestors did. The technology has changed. The context has changed. But the behavior is ancient. Consider the modern fascination with microdosing psychedelics, tiny amounts of mushrooms or LSD, so small you don't see neon bison running through the office, but enough to feel a slight shift in creativity or focus. Tech workers whisper about it. Artists experiment with it. Scientists are actually studying it. It's sold as cutting edge, revolutionary, the future of mental health and productivity. But picture a Stone Age healer listening to this pitch. She might laugh and say, "Oh, you mean when I give the hunter just a crumb of mushroom, so he doesn't freak out and think his shadow is a demon?" Yes, child, we've been doing that. The buzzword is new. The idea is not. Humans have always tinkered with dosage. Too much of a plant could flatten you. So healers learned the art of just enough. A leaf steeped briefly in hot water might soothe a cough, but boiled too long, it might cause hallucinations or worse. A puff of smoke was calming. 3 puffs might bring visions, and half a pouch could send you sprinting into the night, yelling about wolves. The principle of microdosing, that the line between medicine and madness is thin, and managing it takes precision, was discovered by accident thousands of years ago. We just happen to call it by a fancier name now, while wearing lab coats instead of animal skins. What's fascinating is how attitudes around these substances have swung back and forth. In ancient times, plants were woven into ritual. They were sacred, tools to speak with gods and ancestors. Then, in more recent centuries, many of them were outlawed or treated with suspicion. Mushrooms became fairy tale props. Cannabis became a crime. Poppies became scandalous. And now here we are again, with clinical trials, wellness retreats, and podcasts praising their benefits. It's less a revolution than a cycle, a pendulum swinging between fear and fascination. Modern users, though, have a particular flair for paperwork, where a shaman once waved smoke over the group and told stories about flying to the underworld. Today, a researcher with a clipboard asks participants to rate their hallucinations on a scale of 1 to 10. Instead of chanting, there are double-blind studies. Instead of cave paintings, there are PowerPoint slides. It's still about exploring the mind, but the stage looks very different. One imagines a prehistoric visionary rolling their eyes. You turned a conversation with spirits into bar graphs? At the same time, the goals aren't so different. Early humans sought visions for survival, creativity, healing, connection. Modern people reach for substances for many of the same reasons. Some hope to heal from trauma or depression. Some want to spark new ideas, whether that's designing a spear or an app. Some just want to feel less alone, to sit with others, and laugh at the strangeness of being alive. The packaging has changed. The essence hasn't. Alcohol is perhaps the most obvious bridge. Stone Age people discovered it through fermented fruit and honey, delighted and occasionally horrified at the results. Today, alcohol has been domesticated into bars, breweries, and wine cellars. But the behaviors are eerily familiar. People drink to celebrate, to mourn, to bond, to take the edge off. Someone inevitably drinks too much and becomes the butt of jokes, just as a clan member once earned the nickname Fish Hands for insisting his fingers had turned into trout. Some things never change. The same applies to smoking, where once herbs were tossed into the fire and inhaled in the communal haze. Today, cigarettes and vapes have taken their place. The ritual of stepping aside, of sharing smoke as social glue, is ancient. The nicotine buzz is modern shorthand for relaxation, but the roots go back to that first, curious human leaning into smoke, coughing, then laughing with everyone else who coughed. Even caffeine, our most socially acceptable drug, fits the pattern. Coffee, tea, chocolate plants, with power that slipped seamlessly into daily life. Imagine introducing caffeine to a Stone Age clan. One sip, and suddenly people are talking faster, hunting longer, dancing harder. It would have been considered a miracle. Now we treat it as routine, forgetting that it is, at its core, a mind-altering plant we just happen to trust, because it makes mornings survivable. There's humor in all of this too. We pretend sometimes that we're more advanced than our ancestors, more rational, more scientific. Yet, every office worker clutching their third latte by 10 a.m. is reenacting a ritual as old as time. Every college student testing mushrooms on a camping trip is replaying a drama from 20,000 years ago. The costumes are different, but the script hasn't changed much. We are still curious, still reckless, still searching for ways to bend reality just enough to see it differently. What has changed is the safety net. Today, we can run tests, isolate compounds, design therapies. We can take a plant that once made people dance into the night and turn it into a pill that eases anxiety or depression. But even this has roots in the Stone Age healer who noticed that certain leaves eased pain or certain flowers brightened moods. Science builds on stories, and the first stories were told by firelight, long before the lab. So when we compare then and now, the truth is we're not so different. Mushrooms to microdosing, honey brew to craft beer, smoke-filled caves to hookah lounges. It's the same human impulse, dressed in new clothes, to explore, to tinker, to risk, to laugh, to heal. The continuity is almost comforting. We haven't lost the thread. We've just added footnotes. When you zoom out far enough, past the dust of bones and the smudge of cave paintings, past the pottery shards and the residues in ancient bowls, what emerges is something simple. Humans have always wanted more than the ordinary, more than hunting and gathering, more than eating and sleeping. We've always wanted to peek behind the curtain, to ask if there's another world just out of reach. And sometimes, to find that world, we've been willing to chew bitter leaves, sip fermented honey, or sit in smoke until our eyes watered. We've been willing, in other words, to get a little weird. Weirdness, in this sense, isn't frivolous. It's exploration. The same impulse that sent us chasing mammoths across frozen plains is the impulse that sent us chasing visions in flickering firelight. Both were quests for survival. One fed the body, the other fed the mind. Because survival isn't just about calories and shelter, it's about meaning. A body can live without meaning, but not for long. The soul starves. Altered states, whether through dreams, plants, or rituals, were one of the earliest tools for feeding that hunger. Think about the universality of it. There isn't a culture, ancient or modern, that didn't have some version of this exploration. In one place it's mushrooms, in another it's cactus, in another it's honey, or tobacco, or lotus flowers. The details shift with geography, but the pattern holds. Everywhere people went, they looked around and asked, what happens if? And everywhere, they found something that changed them. It wasn't always safe. Sometimes it ended in poison, paranoia, or panic. But even those failures became part of the story, turned into warnings, woven into myths. Curiosity never vanished. It simply learned to walk with caution. And through that dance of risk and reward, humans discovered not only plants and substances, but themselves. There's humor in it too, and that matters. Our ancestors didn't just seek solemn visions. They laughed at the ridiculousness of it all. The fish hands, the talking stumps, the stew that burned despite the fire's supposed advice. Humor wasn't a distraction from spirituality. It was part of it, a reminder that even in the most profound moments, joy and absurdity have a seat at the fire. To laugh together was to survive together. And in a way, that might be the truest legacy. The visions mattered, the rituals mattered, the discoveries mattered. But what endured most was the sense of belonging. Sitting in a circle, sharing food, smoke, drink, story, and laughter that was the heart of human life. Substances helped loosen the walls, but what they revealed was what was already there: connection. Today, as you lie here listening, drifting towards sleep, you carry that legacy. You carry the curiosity that made your ancestors nibble strange berries. You carry the creativity that turned those experiences into stories and rituals. You carry the humor that turned mishaps into memes long before the internet. And you carry the wonder, the simple desire to look beyond the ordinary, to ask if there's more. So let yourself drift now into that same ancient blur where dreaming and waking meet. Let your mind wander where it wants, into visions, into laughter, into silence. Because that wandering, that gentle strangeness, is part of what makes us human. The universal urge to explore, to wonder, and yes, sometimes, to get a little weird. It's not a flaw, it's a gift. And it has carried us from the Stone Age fire to this very moment, where you can close your eyes and follow the same path into the quiet mystery of sleep. That's all for tonight's story. Let your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slow, and drift into the kind of dreams our ancestors would have called visions. Sleep well, you've earned it. And if you're somehow still awake, don't worry. Just let the screen guide you. Click on one of the two videos, waiting here, and keep the journey going. Before you go, make sure to subscribe, so you'll never miss another night of strange history, quiet laughter, and cozy storytelling. Good night, dream deep, and I'll see you in the next one.